Hello, and welcome to Excel 2016 for power users. My name is Sean Bugler, and today we're going to be focusing on getting Excel to work for you. Excel is capable of some incredible things. Whether it's analyzing data or pulling data from other sources, we can use all of that information to answer questions that we might be asking. We can also use Excel to make our jobs easier. No tool is as popular for something just like that than VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP is an incredible tool that allows us to, using a search criteria, find answers from an existing dataset. Let's take a look at what we've got here. For starters, we've got a pretty blank table, but on the left-hand side, we do have product numbers. Now, ideally, with the product number, we'd be able to get the product name and price. Now, of course, if I have some catalog with me, I'd probably be able to find it myself and just type them in. However, if I have a database, like the one on the sheet next, that has these product names and prices, it would be nice if I could take that data and transpose it into this currently empty table. With VLOOKUP, that is an easy task. Let's take a look at how that would work. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to insert that VLOOKUP function. VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup, indicating that we're going to be using a search criteria to identify a row in a vertical fashion. So in the instance of product number 1, here in the Products tab, it's going to search in a particular column for product number 1, going down. Once it finds the product number, we can indicate to Excel how many columns to the right of that discovered value is the output we want. Let's see what that looks like in practice. First things first, we're going to need to place our cursor in the cell that we'd like to build out the function. We'll start with just the cell here in B4. We're going to insert our VLOOKUP function. Now, many people start out by just typing right inside the cell. However, for the purposes of this class, we're going to be utilizing a tool that makes things a lot easier when we start working with more complex functions. I'm talking about the Insert Functions tool, which can be found to the left of the formula bar, as well as in the Formulas tab on the far left-hand side. Using either one of those buttons, give it a click, and you'll get this box right here, the Insert Function box. This contains a list of all the functions in the entire Excel program. It's here in this search box that I'm going to type VLOOKUP and click Go. Excel will then search through its entire catalog until it finds VLOOKUP. Notice here it's bubbled up to the top of the list. Underneath that, a description of the function. Let's take a look. VLOOKUP looks for a value in the leftmost column and then returns a value in the same row from a column you specify. Let's take a look at that first line again here. Looks for a value in the leftmost column of a table. So keep that in mind, because that's going to come back to bite us in just a little bit. For now, go ahead and click OK. It's here that we get the VLOOKUP function arguments box. The function arguments box is going to allow us to build in each individual portion of the VLOOKUP function without having to deviate too heavily to focus on how many commas we should have or how many parentheses. The first thing it's asking for is our lookup value. If you're not sure what the lookup value is, by placing your cursor inside the box, you can get a description of that field down below. In this case, the lookup value is the value to be found in the first column of the table. So this is our search term. In this case, our lookup value is going to be the product number, because using the product number, we'd like to get the product name and price. So I'm going to click on that cell. Go ahead and move down to the next box, and now it's asking for the table array. Now the table array is where is the data that we are going to be both searching in and that contains the data we want output. So our table array is nowhere on this worksheet, it seems here. So we're going to need to find that table. This can be found inside the Products tab here. Okay, there it is. So this is my lookup table. I'm simply going to go ahead and click and drag to select the entire table from top to bottom. Now, you'll notice that I included the headers when I did that. Well, it's not necessarily a make or break to choose to include the headers or not. It's important to stay consistent. So whichever you decide to do, whether it's select the headers or not, please ensure that you continue to do that same method every time you run a VLOOKUP. We're going to go ahead and jump down to the next field here. And this is where it's going to ask us for the column index number. The column index number is the number of columns to the right that our output value exists. So for this, we're actually going to need to go back to our products table. We're looking for the product name. So how many columns from the left of this selected table is the name column? We've got column 1. We've got column 2. We've got column 3, 4, and 5. So, with this information in mind, how many columns from the left is the name column? Well, in this case, it's 2 columns from the left. It's important to note that even though we're using the product column as our search column, it still counts as 1. So in this case, our column index number is going to be 2, indicating that it is the second column from the left. Go ahead and take this opportunity to catch up to where I am right here before we talk about the last topic right here, the range lookup. Once again, the way we got to here was by using the Insert Function Arguments box, either here in the Formulas tab or to the left of the formula bar. We then searched for the VLOOKUP function and then filled in the first 3 values. Go ahead and pause the video and try this out for yourself, getting to the point where you have range lookup blank. Welcome back. So now at this stage, we've gotten to a point where we filled in the lookup value. We know that we're going to be using the product number to search. We've got the table array, so we know where we're going to be searching for the product number and where our product name and price data is. And we know how many columns from the left our particular output value is. In this case, our product name was 2 columns from the left. The last box that we have here is range lookup. Now, you'll notice here that range lookup is not bold like the remaining 3 values. This indicates that it is not a required value, however, it is important. Range lookup allows us to determine whether or not we will get a guaranteed exact match, or if there is no exact match, an error. On the other hand, it will also allow us to find the closest matching value if there is no exact match. Depending on your needs, you may choose either one of those. However, when it comes to database functionality, meaning we're going to be searching for something and we expect only one particular output, you're going to want to have an exact match. As indicated by this description, to find an exact match, we're going to need to type the false value or its binary equivalent of 0. Leaving this cell blank or indicating a true range means that if I type in a product number that doesn't exist, Excel is going to do its best to find the closest match to that product number. However, with a false range lookup, or 0 in this particular instance, if I type in a product number that doesn't exist, Excel will output an error, which is, when we talk about database functionality, the ideal response. Now before we click OK, of course we're going to want a proof to make sure that everything is working the way we intend. Lookup value, good. Table array, good. Column index number, everything's up and running and I want an exact match. Now of course the scariest part about working with functions is the moment right before you hit enter. because you're not entirely sure the function's going to work. But with the function arguments box, you don't have to worry about that. In the bottom left-hand corner, our formula result is already revealed. In this case here, product number 1 should be Biscotto al Nero. Let's click OK to lock that in. And let's verify. Product number 1. Here in the products table, product number 1 is, sure enough, Biscotto al Nero. Not bad. Go ahead and pause the video and make sure that everything checks out. We'll see you after the pause. Welcome back. So at this stage, we've built one single VLOOKUP function. And that feels pretty good. It's nice that we're able to type in a search criteria and get a response. But it's important to note that we've only done one. We still have 9 others to go. So what do? Well, if you don't want to rebuild that function over and over and over again, you're going to want to use the autofill tool. However, before we autofill, let's take a second look at this function. Now, you can take a look at the formula bar to get an idea of what the function's got going on. However, for this class, we're going to jump back into the insert function arguments box. Simply select the cell that contains your function, and using the same 2 buttons we just talked about earlier, the insert functions box, or FX, give it a click, and it'll bring you right back into the function arguments box. Now, what happens when we autofill down? Well, the lookup value changes, and the table array will also change. Now, one of these things shouldn't change. Which one do you think? Well, my lookup value, as I autofill down, I do want it to become A5, A6, A7, and so on. But the table array, do I want this to change? From A3 to E23, I don't want this to become A4 to E24 and A5 to E25. I want this table to stay exactly the way it is. It's an anchor, to anchor that data down. So how do we do that? Well, for those of you that have watched previous lessons, you might have noticed that we learned about something called absolute referencing. But for those of you who are just joining us, absolute referencing allows us to tell Excel that when we autofill, some fields shouldn't change. And we indicate that using the F4 key. So I'm going to highlight my table array field, and I'm going to tap the F4 key 1 time. And just like that, you'll notice that both A3 and E23 are now surrounded by $signs, indicating to Excel that these are values that must be locked in place. Go ahead and take the opportunity to do that, and then select OK. And from here, the grand moment of truth, let's autofill down and see if it works. To autofill, of course, we can use the autofill handle in the bottom right corner, as well as highlight all of the fields you'd like to duplicate this function in, including the cell that has the function, and using the keyboard shortcut Control-D. A quick review shows us that A4 becomes A5, becomes A6. However, our table reference remains the same consistently. Go ahead and take this opportunity to try this out for yourself, and join me after the break. Welcome back. So now we've gone through the motions of establishing a VLOOKUP. And the cool part about VLOOKUP is not just that we can search one thing one time, but that we can now update these numbers to search for additional products. In this case here, you can see that we have products up to and including 20 values. So let's say I change 1 here to 11. And 2 to 12. I should, in theory, be getting these product names. In this case, 11 is Cafe Francisi. And sure enough, that is exactly what 11 is. Now that we've seen the one way of building VLOOKUP, there was one part of this that was a little tedious. It was the selection of the table array. Choosing the table array was the most time-consuming part of that, because not only did we have to go and find the data, but then we had to absolute reference it. Instead of having to go through that whole process, there is something we could have done prior to the building of this VLOOKUP function in order to alleviate some of these problems. As I'm looking at this product data here, I know that this is the exact field that I'll be searching in every time I use that VLOOKUP function for product info. So if I know that, why would I continue to go through and specify the product worksheet and the A3 through E23 cell referencing? Instead, why don't I tell Excel that this is the product table? This is called using defined names to build out a VLOOKUP function. So if I want to define this field as some name, I'm going to simply highlight the data, and here inside the Formulas tab, find the Define Name button. So having selected that table field, go ahead and click on Define Name. It's going to ask us, hey, what do you want to name it? In this case, we're going to call it Product Table. It's important to note that spaces don't play nicely inside the defined name field, although you can use underscores if you'd like. We want to verify that our reference is for A3 to E23, and I'd also like to point out that notice it's absolute referenced. Defining names, by default, absolute references the field. Once you've verified both of those fields, go ahead and click OK. So now, we've named this the product table, meaning that when I use the name product table, it's referring to the product worksheet A3 through E23. Let's see what that would look like inside of VLOOKUP function. But before we do that, pause the video and take this opportunity to catch up. Alright, so let's go through the motions one last time to build out a VLOOKUP function that establishes the price. Just like last time, go ahead and place your cursor inside column and cell C4. From here, we're going to use the same tool we used last time, that Insert Arguments box, by using the Insert Functions tool. VLOOKUP is now a recent function, so it'll be bubbled up to the top. Of course, if yours is not, you can use the search field and click Go to find VLOOKUP. Once you find VLOOKUP, go ahead and click OK. Let's try this again. VLOOKUP, our lookup value is going to be the product number. Our table array, this is where we ran into the problem last time. It was a little tedious to have to go and hunt down that table array. However, because we have the foresight now to define a name for that data table, all I have to do now is, from the Formulas tab, select the Use in Formula dropdown and select Product Table. Alternatively, you can use the keyboard shortcut of F3 to get the Paste Name field box. Using either one of those methods, insert Product Table into the table array. I would like to point out that yes, you can type the name reference as well, but please do ensure that you see the headers appear to the right after you do. Next, we need the column index number. So I'm going to jump over here to the product worksheet. And just like last time, I need to identify how many columns from the left the price column is. In this case here, we've got column 1, column 2, 3, 4, and 5. Once again, I'd like to reaffirm that using this first search column does not preclude it from counting in the columns. Our original table array includes column A and therefore is column 1. So how many columns from the left of our selected data table is the price column? In this case, it's 5 columns from the left. Another thing that's really important to note before we go any further is that column numbers and column letters have nothing in common. This table could have been anywhere inside the spreadsheet, and the column numbers would have been the same because it's all dependent on what table array is selected. So our column index number is going to be 5. Lastly, in the range lookup, do we want a potential relative match or only an exact match? And in this instance, as with all of our databases, we want an exact match. So we're going to use the false range lookup value, or its binary equivalent of 0. With that having been done, verify that everything kicks in, look in the bottom left corner, and you'll see that our formula result should be 2.5, or in this case, $2.50. And there it is. And because we had the foresight to use the named range instead of going through and selecting the field and then going through that whole process, we can now autofill without having to absolute reference it because defined names are absolute referenced by default. So I'm going to click and drag down. And for posterity's sake, I will format them appropriately. So there you go. Go ahead and take this opportunity to catch up. Once again, the way we got there was first defining a name for the products table. From there, we simply built our VLOOKUP function just like we did last time, supplementing the table array with the named range. We filled out the remaining fields and we locked it in. Go ahead and try that out for yourself, and join us after the break. Welcome back. So we got our first taste of retrieving data. We were able to use the search criteria to find a desired output. Now that we're looking at as another worksheet in the exact same structure, so this can't possibly be any more difficult, right? I've got my employee ID number, and I'd like to get last name and first name. Sure. So let's go take a look at that data set that I'm going to be pulling this information from. Okay, so I've got my first name, I got my last name, but I've got my employee number over here. Now at first glance, you might not necessarily think this is a big deal. But let's take a look at the original description of VLOOKUP. It looks for the value in the leftmost column of a table. So this is a problem here. You see, employee number is to the right of first name and last name. However, VLOOKUP requires that whatever column you're searching in, that must be the first column of your dataset, meaning that we can only use employee ID number to search to the right. So this would be our table, leaving first and last name out. Well, that's tough. So how do we use VLOOKUP to pull in data using employee number? Well, you can't. Now, sure, you could rearrange this worksheet here. However, we're not always going to have the luxury of being able to control the worksheets we're searching in. Whether it's because that data exists in a controlled worksheet, or they're reports that come in every day and you need to work with them without having to rearrange them. In these situations, we're going to need to turn to other functions. Let's take a look at two functions in particular that might be able to help us out. The first one I'd like to talk to you about is index. So let's see if index does what we need. Here we're searching for employee ID number, okay. And we're looking for the last name output. So let's take a look and see what that does for us. I'm going to go ahead and select my Insert Functions tool, which I can find again to the left of my formula bar or in the Formulas tab on the far left. And I'm going to search for index. Let's see. Returns a value or reference of the cell at the intersection of a particular row and column in a given range. Okay, returns a value. That sounds like what I'm going for, so I'm going to try it. I'm going to select index and click OK. Now with index, it's a little particular about what kind of function arguments you're asking for. Are we trying to build out an array search or a specific reference search? In this case, we're searching in a range of cells, so we're going to want to use the array. And in fact, in most instances of database functionality, you're going to want to use this first function argument, the array function argument of index. So go ahead and choose OK. The next thing it's asking for is the array. Where is the answer we're looking for? In this particular instance, it's going to be here. Right? Just like last time, our table array. Okay. The next thing it's asking for is the row number. Huh. The row number. So the row number of what? Well, in this case, it's asking for the row number. How far down is AW55? All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the column number is going to be how many columns in is the answer we want. In this case, 2. Huh. So there's our table array. And we've got our row number and our column number. It gives us the answer, I guess. Boom, bingo. But what was the problem with that whole method there? Well, we had to do the work for Excel. So that seems kind of dumb. Let's try match. Maybe match is what we need. Before we try match, however, go ahead and take this opportunity to try out index for yourself. The way we do that, once again, was by using the insert function arguments box. Remember, we used the array style of argument. Our array was the table field that contained the data. Our row number was how many rows down was the field we were searching. And the column number was how many columns from the left was the data we were looking for. In this case, column 1, 2, and 3. Last name, of course, being the output we were looking for. Our column number was 2. So go ahead and take this opportunity to try out index for yourself, and join me after the break. Alright, so index didn't do it for us. Let's try match. Maybe match is exactly what we were looking for. Once again, I'm going to use my insert functions tool. I'm going to search for match. Okay, here we go. Returns the relative position of an item in an array that matches a specified value. Okay, so it's searching for a specified value. That sounds a little bit more my speed. So I'm going to choose match and click OK. Yeah, lookup value. Okay, just like VLOOKUP. So my lookup value is my employee number. Lookup array. The contiguous range of cells containing possible lookup values. Okay. So that's the employee number column. That's the range of cells that contains my search field. And then match type. Do I want an exact match or a relative match depending on the value? And in this case, because it's database related, I want an exact match. So I'm going to use the binary answer of 0 or false. And I'm going to click OK. What? What is 5? 5 is not the answer I thought I was going to get here. What is that? Oh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Row number 5 is AW55. So that seems kind of useless. Why would I want just the row number? When would I ever need that? So index was useless by itself because when we were building the function, we saw that it required a row output value. Likewise, we saw that match was useless because it only provided a row number as the response. I think I'm starting to see where this is going to go. But before I do that, go ahead and take this opportunity to pause the video and build out your match function. Once again, the way we got there was by using the insert function arguments box and searching for match. We then specified the lookup value as the employee ID number. We then specified the lookup array as the column that contained our lookup value. And lastly, we wanted to ensure an exact match, so our match type is going to be 0. Go ahead and try that for yourself and join us after the break. All right. So we've seen two functions that by themselves didn't do much for us. There may be a way to use the strengths of both to accomplish something that even VLOOKUP isn't capable of. Let's take a look one more time. We're looking at the employee ID, and we'd like to get their last name and their first name. Now, of course, in the payroll worksheet, we see that they are to the left of our search field, meaning that we can't use VLOOKUP because VLOOKUP only allows us to search to the right of the search field. But we did see that VLOOKUP, while it did have that limitation, index and match didn't. So let's try this out. Here in the last name field, we're going to go ahead and insert another function, and we'll start with index. You're going to want to remember to use the first style of function argument. All right, let's try this out. Array. Oof, wait a minute. This is going to get tedious really quickly. Having to go from sheet to sheet and specifically click and drag all the way down? I don't think so. Instead, what can we do? What did we do in a previous lesson to avoid having to click and drag to select all these different fields? Especially if we know we're going to be using them over and over and over again. And potentially, autofilling. What made things easier to reference while also ensuring that it was absolutely referenced? Well, the define names tool. We were able to, in a previous lesson of VLOOKUP, define the names and use them to retrieve the data without having to remember the cell references or even the worksheet name. So let's do that. In this instance, we only need these three columns, from first to employee ID number and down. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the headers, and then using my keyboard shortcut of Shift, Control, and then tapping the down arrow key, I'm going to select those three columns. Once again, it's important to note that I did not select any of the blank fields down below. While it's not necessarily going to break anything, this is a bit more of a surgical approach that will ensure there's no potential errors. With these three columns in place, I could individually define names for all three columns. But in this case, because I want three separate named ranges, I'm instead going to use the Create from Selection tool. Now, as a refresher for those of you who have already used the Create from Selection tool, this does require that it has column headers, because the Create from Selection tool doesn't let you manually create the names. It simply takes the names from either the top row, the left column, the bottom row, or the right column. In this case, our names are in the top row, so I'm going to deselect the checkbox in left column. Once again, verify that the top of each column contains the names, and click OK. A little anticlimactic, it doesn't seem like it's done anything. But if we click on the Use in Formula dropdown, there it is. There's our employee, first, and last named ranges. Go ahead and pause the video and take this opportunity to create your named ranges, and then join me after the break so we can continue on with our index and match. Alright, so now we've laid the groundwork. Let's go ahead and start over. This time, once again, starting with index. Now, of course, for me, index is already at the top because it's our most recently used function. But if it's not, as always, you can type index into the search field and select it and click OK. Once again, it's going to be our top style of argument. Here we go, our array. In this case, our array is the field of cells that has the output we're looking for. So our array is going to be last name. Using the Use in Formula dropdown, which of these named ranges contains the last name value? Well, in this case, the last named range. We'll know it works because we'll see all the last names in that field to the right. The next thing it's asking for is row number. What row number is the last name we're searching for? But this was the part we didn't want to have to do ourselves. So what can we turn to? The match function. The match function only provides row numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and start by typing match and an open parentheses. Now I know many of you guys have gotten comfortable using this function arguments box, but you'll notice when we type match, it doesn't change. We don't get another function arguments box. That's kind of disappointing. Well, as it turns out, that function arguments box does exist, but Excel can only reveal one function argument box at a time. Currently, we're inside the index one. If we'd like to see the match function arguments box, we're going to need to find match in the formula bar. It's important to note the exact way that I've typed it currently into the row number. Match, open parentheses. That open parentheses is key. From here, I'm going to find the word match and click. And just like that, the function argument box changes from index to match. Now it's really important to note that when you're changing function argument boxes, look where my cursor is. It's now in the middle of the word match. In order to ensure that I don't interfere with the way this function is being built, I have to remember to move my cursor back into the function arguments box. So now, what's my lookup value? Well, it's the employee ID number. Okay. What about my lookup array? Well, if you remember, our array is where are we looking for the lookup value. And in this case, our lookup value is inside the employee column. Again, verify that we get the exact output we're looking for. And lastly, the match type. What kind of match type do we want? Do we want a relative or exact match? Do we want an error if the employee number doesn't exist? Or do we want Excel to guess what it thinks we meant? In this case, we don't want Excel to guess, so we're going to use the 0 output value. This is important. So with that having been done, go ahead and click Not OK. Oh, almost got you there. It's easy to forget. We're still inside the index function. The function arguments box is great, but it's important to remember that even though we only see this box right now, doesn't mean that this is the only part of the function. We actually have to, now that we've built our match function, go back to our index function. To go back into our index function, we're going to do it the same way we got into match, by finding index here in the formula bar and clicking on it. And just like that, it brings us back into index. Notice my cursor is still in the formula bar, so I'll need to bring my cursor back into the function arguments box. And with that having been said, my column number will be 1 because there's only one column that I'm searching in. And lastly, I'm going to click OK. Boom. And there it is. According to this output, GW29 is cling. And if I go to the payroll worksheet, GW29 is in fact cling. Not bad. Go ahead and take this opportunity to pause the video and try this out for yourself. ensuring that we use the first of the index function argument boxes, ensuring that we build match out in the row number field, and ensuring that the named ranges all give the output values that we expect. Pause the video and try this out for yourself, and join me after the break. Welcome back. Because we laid the groundwork properly, and on top of that, we used named ranges instead of specific cell references, one of the biggest benefits is we can now autofill down. To autofill down, you can click on the handle and drag down. However, because there is a column to the left of this search field right here, I can find that drop-down button right here, the autofill handle, and simply double-click. And that will autofill all the way down to the remaining cells. Let's go ahead and do last name just to make sure that everything clicks. This time, of course, we could use the insert function arguments box, but I'd also like to point out that we have access to a full function library, which does provide all the functions inside of Excel as well. In this case, index and match are both lookup and reference functions. So I'll start by selecting index. Top or bottom? We want to use top because we're searching through arrays. In this case, our array output is now going to be the last name column, the field that contains our desired output. So by using either the F3 key or the use in formula dropdown, I'm going to select first. For row number, I don't want to figure that one out myself, so I'm going to use the match function. And I remember to get back into that match function arguments box, I need to find match in the formula bar and give it a click. Remembering to put my cursor back into the function arguments box, my lookup value is still GW29. My lookup array, what array contains my search field? My search field is the employee number field. And lastly, what kind of match type do I want? Do I want a relative or an exact match? It's database searching, so I want an exact match. I will use the match type 0, indicating an exact match. Lastly, I need to remember that I'm still inside the index function. Now that my match function is complete, I'm going to bring my cursor back up to the formula bar and select index. And I'm going to tie it all off. And lastly, I'm going to tie it all off by indicating that there's only one column of search. And I'm going to click OK. And just like that, I now have another index and match function indicating that GW29 is not just Kling, but Sarah Kling. And a quick verification does reveal GW29 is Sarah Kling. I'll then autofill down. And there you go. It's that easy. Go ahead and pause the video and try that second wave out for yourself, just to ensure that you feel comfortable. We'll see you after the break. Time to shift gears. We saw that data retrieval was an incredibly powerful feature available inside of Excel, both with VLOOKUP and, in order to circumvent the limitations of VLOOKUP, use index and match. Now let's talk about some other limitations of Excel. Excel is really great at working with data, but when you have too many functions or formulas in place, it can bog the whole thing down. To circumvent that, Excel implemented something called array analysis, meaning that we can take data and use one function or formula to manipulate mass sets of data all at the same time. I'll give you an example. Here we're calculating gross pay, and that's a pretty straightforward process. Of course, we would start with the equal sign, and then do one cell, multiplied by another cell, and then enter to lock it in and autofill the rest of the way down. However, there's a couple of problems with this one. The first one is every single cell is now its own formula. And when you multiply that by hundreds or tens of thousands of records, you can run into some major memory issues. Another really big problem here is it's great that we're able to calculate each of these here. And in fact, let's say I'm going to go ahead and calculate the total gross pay here, which of course would just be a summation of all of these cells down here. The problem is at any one moment, I can accidentally delete a cell by typing something else into it. And if I'm not careful, I might not notice that. So in order to circumvent both of those issues, we can use this array analysis. Go ahead and take this opportunity to calculate the total gross pay of these cell fields, calculating the sum of, in this case, F6 to F36. And join me after the break. Alright, welcome back. So this isn't quite the way we wanted to handle it. We don't want every cell to have its own function, but we still want the answer. So how do we do this in a more efficient manner? Well, to start, let's get rid of all of these cells here that have the functions in them. Alright, our total gross pay comes out to $0. Now, to calculate gross pay, it's simply a breakdown of hours times hourly rate. So instead of going through individually by cell, let's tell Excel that we're simply multiplying one column by another. That way it only has to do all the calculations one time instead of cell by cell. To start, we're going to need to select all the cells that are going to require an output. In this case, that's everything from here in cell F6 down to about F36 here. So all of these cells are going to require an output. Next, we're going to start typing our function. Now I know it feels weird to start typing a formula or function into a mass set of cells, but hang in there with me. We're going to start with our equal sign, of course. And we're going to select everything in the hours column. So I'm going to click and drag all the way down from D6 down to D36. So we'd like to multiply this range by the hourly rate range of E6 to E36. So we're now looking at a range multiplied by a range. Pretty crazy. Let's go ahead and hit enter and see what happens. A little anticlimactic. By hitting enter, it didn't really do much for us. Let's take a look here and see what we can fix. Everything looks right, but for some reason that didn't work. Let's try this again. So once again, I'm going to highlight all of the cells that I want an output in. Next, I'm going to type in my equal sign. I'm going to click on the first one and using my Control-Shift-Enter and tapping the down arrow key, I'm going to select D6 through D36, multiplied by hourly rate. Hitting enter didn't work last time. And that's kind of a frustrating thing because the expectation is, of course, that Excel will just do whatever you need to do. In this particular instance, it's important to note that array formulas and functions used to be known and are still today commonly known as Control-Shift-Enter functions. It's a special kind of function that allows us to manipulate ranges of data. So instead of just hitting the Enter key this time, however, go ahead and press and hold the Control and Shift keys. While holding the Control and Shift keys, tap the Enter key. And check it out. All the selected fields now have their selected output. Each individual cell a multiplication of its corresponding hours and hourly rate. Our total gross pay gives us our $18,000 output that we had previously. This is now using substantially less memory because it's all just one function. As an added bonus, go ahead and try to find any cell and attempt to delete it. In this case, I'm going to try and delete row 16, $472.15. Okay, it looks like it let me delete it. But now I'm going to go ahead and hit the Enter key. It won't let me. I'm actually hitting the Enter key right now. Let's try to click away from it. No luck. You cannot edit an array function or formula. In fact, to get out of it, you actually have to press the Escape key explicitly. So check it out. Try this for yourself. Remember, the way we got here was by highlighting all of the fields that we wanted an output in this case from F6 to F36. We then just started typing our function or formula. Equal sign. We selected our first range, in this case D6 through D36, and our second range of E6 through E36. And from here, once everything was in place, we didn't hit Enter. We used the modifier keys of Control and Shift, and then hit the Enter key, executing our array formula. Go ahead and pause the video and try this out for yourself. All right. So we saw that we were able to use array formulas to analyze two separate fields together, multiplying a full range by a full range. But what else can arrays do? Well, let's take a look at this particular worksheet. And we see here that we're trying to find the salary output of a particular individual. Not too bad. In this case, we're using first name or last name to find the salary output. This would be a great job for VLOOKUP. So let's go ahead and try that. I'm going to go ahead and insert my VLOOKUP function. Here in the Insert Functions box, I'm going to search VLOOKUP. Okay. So it's asking for my lookup value. Well, it's easy. I'll just choose one of these. James. Oh, can't do James. There's two James. Okay, I'll search by Clark then. Well, Clark is good, but now I'm starting to see that there's multiple Smiths, so I can't search by last name either. Shoot. So if I can't search by just first name or just last name, it doesn't look like VLOOKUP is actually going to be much help to me. Instead, we're going to have to turn to a tool we just learned that allows us to circumvent the limitations of VLOOKUP. Of course, I'm talking about index and match. So let's try this again. Here in the salary field, I'm going to insert my index function. Okay, there's index. Do I want to use my top or my bottom style of argument? We're still searching an array field, so we're going to use the array argument. All right, so the array is going to be the salary column because the salary is the output that I want. But just like last time, I really don't want to have to go through this whole process of clicking and dragging to select everything. So I'm actually going to, even in this instance, create some named ranges. So I'm going to click and drag to highlight all three columns. And because each of these columns has a name already attached to it, I can use the Create from Selection tool, which will automatically generate names from the top row. Now, of course, I see left column was also selected, so I'm going to deselect that one to ensure that each column gets its own name of first name, last name, and salary. And I'm going to click OK. So I've now created three named ranges: first name, last name, salary. So here in the salary field, I'm going to, again, insert my index function. My array, my desired output, can be found in this salary column. So I'm going to use my use in formula dropdown to input salary. I can see here by 64901, 7855 that these values did populate. Next, it's asking for our row number. Now we don't want to count the row number ourselves, so we're going to turn to our match function. Now I don't see my match function arguments box, but remember that's because we can only see one function argument at a time. So having typed match and the open parentheses, I can't begin to tell you enough how important that open parentheses is. I'm going to click on the word match and bring my cursor back into the function arguments box. So now we're back to lookup value. Well, with lookup value, I can't use just James and I can't use just Clark because in both instances, the first name is repeated and the last name is repeated in the instance of Smith. So if I can't search by just James or just Clark, I'm going to have to create my own unique search value. In this case, my unique search value is going to be James ampersand Clark. So F1 and F2, creating a unique value now known as James Clark. I've unified these two cells together in order to create a search field that can only exist one time. While there may be multiple James, and in this case multiple Smiths as well, there is no multiple James Clark. So now I've got my lookup value, but now I need my lookup array. The problem is my lookup array is supposed to be where I can find my lookup value. But there is no column in particular that has James Clark as one cell. So my lookup array is going to be exactly that, another array series. In this case, my lookup array is going to be first name and last name together. So using my use in formula dropdown, I'm going to select first name and I'm going to merge it with the last name field by yet again using my ampersand. First name and last name, creating multiple unique values of Karen Smith, James Anderson, James Clark, and so on. Lastly, do I want a relative or an exact match? Of course I want an exact match, so I will use the output value of 0. Now, of course, once again, I'd like to remind you we are still inside the index function, despite the fact that it says match here. So now that we've built this out, we need to go back to index to polish things off. So I'm going to take my cursor up to the formula bar, find the word index, and give it a click. And lastly, my column number, how many columns are in my salary field? 1. So I'm going to click OK to lock this in. And it didn't work. What? What happened? Well, let's think about this. What was different about what we did this time versus the last time we built an index and match function? Well, the only real difference seems to be that when I build out my match, I used an array, an amalgamation of 2 columns, 2 separate fields. Well, what did we learn about when we're analyzing using arrays? What are they commonly known as? They're commonly known as Control-Shift-Enter functions. Now, surely that can't be the difference between clicking OK and getting a value error and pressing and holding the Control-Shift keys and just tapping the Enter key, can it? If you don't already have it open because you closed it out, reopen it by using the Insert Function Arguments box. And then press and hold the Control-Shift keys and tap the Enter key. And check it out. It's incredible that that is the difference between a value error and the function working. But that is the case because we created these two merged fields, known as arrays. It required us to build out the Control-Shift-Enter execution. Notice what happens when you build out an array. It surrounds the entire formula in brackets. Interesting. Go ahead and take this opportunity to try this out for yourself. Once again, I'd like to reiterate the importance of remembering to press and hold Control, Shift, and tap the Enter key to lock in our function array. Go ahead and pause the video, try this out for yourself, and we'll see. Welcome back. Not bad, right? Arrays allow us to analyze mass sets of data, and in the event of non-unique values, we can still search by creating our own unique values, unlike in VLOOKUP. Now let's say I'd like to add a new value to this column, in this case, me. Here in the bottom, in row 9, I'm going to just type in Sean Bugler. And we'll say I make a modest $100,000. Not bad. There we go. So there's my name to the list, so surely that means I'm searchable now, right? Well, I'm going to go ahead and type in Sean. Now, of course, because there's no Sean Clark, naturally that means that there is no salary. But once I change last name to Bugler, surely I should see my salary. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Why not? Well, in order to understand why this didn't work, it's important to remember what we selected when we built out our named ranges. In this case, let's check it out. To view any named ranges that have already been created, you'll need access to the Name Manager. So find the Name Manager in the Formulas tab and give it a click. Here we'll see all three named ranges that we created: first name, last name, and salary. To see what this named range has, I'm going to click inside the Refers To field down below. With a single click, it reveals that my first name array contains only Karen through Richard and stops explicitly just above Sean. This is because Sean didn't exist when I created these named ranges. Named ranges don't just automatically expand. At least, not by default. Now, of course, I can go through last name and salary and see that all of them stop exactly where the original end of the dataset was. So how do we get Excel to know that there are new values now that need to be accounted for? Well, by itself, Excel doesn't know to do that, but we can get it to. In order to do that, we're going to have to build out a dynamically updating range selection function. I know that sounds like a lot, so hang in there with me. First things first, we're going to place our cursor here, in cell E8 explicitly. What we're going to do is we're going to build out an auto selection function here in this cell, and we're going to move it into the named range field. We won't be building it in the name manager so that we have access to all of the tools available in a regular spreadsheet. First things first, we're going to need a function that allows us to select multiple cells. The function out there that allows you to select mass series of cells is commonly known as the offset function. So let's find that offset function. Go ahead and click on your Insert Function Arguments box and search for offset, all one word. Offset returns a reference to a range that is a given number of rows and columns from a given reference. So starting from a particular anchor point, Offset will select a range of cells. Go ahead and find Offset and give it a click. Go ahead and take this opportunity to get to this point with me here. Once again, ensure that your cursor is off to the side on one of the rows that contains a value inside the dataset. You'll see why in just a little bit. But for now, pause the video and join me here in the offset function arguments box. Welcome back. So we're going to build our first selection function to work for the first name column. We would like our first name named range to auto-expand to encompass new values as they are typed below. First things first, we're going to start with a reference point. In this case, our reference point is going to be the header, cell A1. Now it's important to note that when we're building a function to place somewhere other than where we're building it, in this case, we're building this function here. However, this is not the final destination of this function. We're going to be moving it somewhere else. When you're building a function to move somewhere else, it's important to absolute reference everything. So go ahead and tap the F4 key to absolute reference cell A1. The next thing it's asking for is what number of rows offset from the reference function is the first value that we want to collect. In this case, the first value we want to start collecting is Karen, which is one row down. So we're going to use 1 inside the rows field. This indicates that when we start from the anchor point here, A1, it's going to see that number 1 in the rows column and go one row down to start here with Karen. How many columns to the left or right from the anchor point is our first value? In this case, there is no left and right. It is directly beneath our anchor point, our reference cell. So it is 0 columns. Next, it's going to ask for height. How tall is the selection field? Well, right now, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 cells starting from Karen contained in the height. So if we wanted this offset function to select all of them, we would type 8. However, the problem with that is if we just type 8 in here and then we add a new cell later, that 8 is not going to magically change to 9. So instead, we need a function that dynamically identifies how many fields have values in them and then provide that value. To do that, we're going to need a function that counts everything inside of a particular set of selection. Now, many of you guys are probably familiar with the count function. The count function counts how many cells have numbers in them. However, if we'd like to use a function that selects all cells that have anything in them, we're going to need to use count A and an open parentheses. So go ahead and join me here. Count A, indicating we're counting all, open parentheses. We want to count all cells that are inside column A. So I've taken my cursor and I've clicked on the column letter A, indicating now that we are selecting the entire column. You will see A:A. And just like with the cell reference, we're going to need to absolute reference these cell references. So tap the F4 key once again. Having done that, we're going to close out our count A function. And you'll see that it gives us a value of 9. There are 9 cells in this column that contain values. So let's check this out. Our reference is cell A1, okay. But we have a row offset of 1, so it's going to actually start here. with Karen. So starting from Karen, it's going to select 9 cells. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's going to include this blank cell right here. What happened? Why is it selecting that blank cell? Why did it give us a value of 9? Well, it's because we told it to count all cells. It's including the header. So we need to stop it from taking that header into account. And the solution is actually beautifully simple. We're just going to do count A minus 1. This is going to counteract that existence of a column or a cell value that doesn't have anything to do with our selection field. So we now have a height of 8. Lastly, how wide is the column? Well, it's just this column here, column A, so it is 1 column wide. So there you go. We've got our reference anchor point. We've got how many rows and columns offset it is, in this case 1 row down and no columns to the left or right. And then, to determine how many cells we select, we used a count A function to count all cells in column A and subtracted 1 to account for the fact that the header is not actually part of the data. And then, of course, it was 1 column wide. Now that we've got all of that in place, we're going to click OK. Now, this is really important to remember. When we built this offset function out here, remember, this is not where this function is actually supposed to go. We built it out here because we wanted to use all of the tools available that make it easy for us to build functions. But the bonus to that is there is a visual indication that this function is working. When you build out a dynamically updating offset function, it will always provide the value of the row you're sharing it with. In this case, we used a count A function for column A, and our anchor point is A1, meaning that by building this on this row here, it is going to find the value in row A and reflect it. Now, again, this value doesn't mean anything to us just yet, but because we see the word Richard on the same row as Richard here in column A, we know that this function is working and will work when we put it where it needs to go. Go ahead and take this opportunity to catch up to where I am here, and we'll see you after the break. All right, so we've built our function now. Let's go ahead and copy this function and move it where it needs to go. To copy a function, don't just click the cell and press Ctrl-C, because that's not going to do it. What you'll need to do is, having selected the cell, in the formula bar, highlight everything, and then using either the copy button here in the Home tab or the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-C, copy the text of the formula. This is an important distinction versus simply clicking on the cell and pressing Ctrl-C. From here, we're going to need access to our named ranges, which we remember are in the Formulas tab in the Name Manager. So here in the Name Manager, we're going to find first name, and there it is. So we built this function for first name. Having clicked on that, place your cursor inside the Refers To field and delete everything. Once you've deleted everything, using either the Paste button in the Home tab or Ctrl-V, paste your offset function. Please take this opportunity to verify that the cell reference, A1, and the column reference, column A, are both absolute referenced. This is critical. Once you've pasted the function, simply click the green checkbox. You'll notice that it automatically adds in your specific worksheet references, in this case, the array function worksheet. To see if it worked, simply take your cursor and place it inside the box. And check it out. Sean is now part of the named range. It's dynamically updating based on how many cells have values in them. Let's do the same thing for last name. Now, instead of building that function all over again, we can simply paste that same function and change the A values to B for last name. Now, please remember not to use the arrow keys when inside this refers to field. Arrow keys, while they do not work in the way you expect them to. By placing my cursor at the end, I'll give you a demonstration. I'm simply going to press the right arrow key, and you'll notice that it just adds a bunch of cells to it. So avoid using the arrow keys at all costs here in the name manager. I've changed all of my A values to B values. I'll lock it in by pressing the green checkbox. And then I'll place my cursor inside the refers to field to see that Bugler is now part of the last name column. One last time for the salary function, I'm going to delete everything in the refers to field, paste my offset function, and then change the column values from A to C, because that is the column that salary is in. Don't let that count A fool you. That is not part of the cell column reference. Count A is still part of the function. Having done that, I'm going to click the green checkbox one last time and place my cursor inside the field one last time to see 100,000 has now been accommodated for. So all three named ranges now contain offset functions that, in theory, will dynamically update every single time. Now that we've built these named ranges, let's close out and check it out. Just as we're closing out, the salary now updates to $100,000. Let's try another value. Let's add somebody new. Like, let's say, my best friend Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla. He probably makes a fair amount more than me. We'll say 200,000. Having added Elon Musk to this field at the bottom here, remember when I typed in Sean Bugler, it didn't auto-update. But that was before I created my dynamic named ranges. So here in first name, I'm going to type Elon. Now, of course, there's no Elon Bugler. But if I change Elon Bugler to Elon Musk, there it is. Everything is now firing appropriately. All three named ranges are now dynamically updating, meaning as new cells are introduced down at the bottom, our named ranges will expand to encompass them. So what was once Richard Lopez at the very bottom became all of this. Go ahead and pause the video and try this out for yourself. You'll no longer need this offset function here in the worksheet, so you can remove that as well. Pause the video and try this out for yourself. We'll see you after the break. In the last couple of lessons, we've seen that Excel is incredibly powerful at pulling data out of existing datasets and organizing it for us. However, there are going to be plenty of instances where we don't necessarily want to separate data, or maybe we don't necessarily need another copy, or we don't want to break things out of their existing order. We simply want to highlight content that meets certain conditions. In those instances, we turn to something called conditional formatting. Conditional formatting is a tool that allows us to inject certain conditions and in turn impact the visual part of cells. Let's take a look. Here in this payroll worksheet, I'd like to identify employees that have exceeded a certain gross pay. To do that, I could sort and filter, but as we've mentioned before, there are going to be instances where I either can't sort and filter or simply don't want to. To change the visual aspect of the gross pay column, I'm going to first need to select it. So I'm going to go ahead and do just that by taking my cursor and selecting the first cell here in K3. I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut of Shift Control and tap the down arrow key. This will select everything down from K3 to K97. Having selected this column, I'm now going to jump into conditional formatting, which can be found in the Home tab on the far right side. Conditional formatting has a lot of really cool pre-formatted tools available for us. In particular, the Highlight Cells rule. In this example, I'd like to find all cells that exceed a certain dollar amount. So I'm going to use the greater than. Now, it's asking me, hey, how do you want to format these cells and based on what criteria? It's trying to guess what I'd like to highlight it on, but the reality is I don't want to type a number here because that will be the number forever. Instead, what I'd like to do is point a cell here to M4, indicating that whatever cell number this has should be the values that are highlighted. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now, as it stands, everything's been highlighted. The reason being, everything is greater than 0. So I'll need to take this opportunity to type a number in, like let's say 400. I'd like to identify all employees who exceeded $400 in gross pay. So I'm going to type 400 and tap the Enter key. And just like that, all values that are above 400 remain highlighted, the rest have been deselected. Let's try 700. Once again, all values that exceed 700 remain highlighted. Those that do not exceed 700 have been deselected. Go ahead and take this opportunity to try that for yourself, and join us after the break. Welcome back. So a couple of things. The first, I wasn't necessarily in love with the fact that when this cell was blank, everything gets highlighted. The second thing, I noticed that the header has gotten caught up in the mix here, so we'll want to adjust that as well. In order to adjust anything about a conditional formatting rule, we'll need to go to the Manage Rules setting. The Manage Rules can be found in the Conditional Formatting dropdown towards the bottom, indicated by Manage Rules. Now you'll notice in this view I don't actually see any rules currently, but this is because this is showing formatting rules for the current selection, which is M5 at the moment. In order to see all rules in the entire worksheet, we'll need to change this dropdown to this worksheet. And there it is. So here's our rule. This is where we can make changes to the rule and make things work a little bit better for us. However, in this instance, we're going to delete the rule so that we can work with things from scratch. Go ahead and delete that rule and click OK. This time, instead of building a rule based on a pre-formatted highlight cells rule, we're going to use a new rule and build this rule from scratch to meet our needs. So let's try again. Highlighting everything in the gross pay column, this time not selecting the column. So I'm going to place my cursor in K4, and using my keyboard shortcut of Shift Control and tapping the down arrow key, I'll select down to K97. Having selected the cells that I would like to conditionally format, I'm now going to turn to my conditional formatting dropdown, and this time select New Rule. Here in the New Formatting Rule box, I have the option of formatting cells based on their values, based on values they contain, based on top or bottom ranked values, values above or below an average, duplicate values, or in this case, for our advanced users, power users in particular, we're going to be using a formula to determine which cells to format. So what is our condition going to be? Well, the first thing we want to account for is whether or not our gross pay search has a value in it. So we're going to actually start with an if function, where the if function is if M4 does not equal 0, then execute the rule. So once again, if M4 equals 0, this output would be false, and as per conditional formatting, because this formula is not true, no condition formatting would take place. However, if M4 does not equal 4, meaning that this cell has a value, then we will build a function that allows us to change the condition. That condition being, and I'm going to select K4 here, the very top selected cell. From here, K4 greater than or equal to M4, indicating that whatever is in column K, if it is greater than or equal to the cell number M4, we should conditionally change it. There's one last thing I need to make an adjustment to before I close out these parentheses. Currently, K4 is absolute referenced, meaning that this function is stunted. It's only going to check to see if K4 specifically is greater than or equal to M4. In order to counteract that, we need to unlock the row value by deleting the $sign in front of row 4. So we should now see absolute referenced column K4 greater than or equal to the full absolute referenced cell of M4. From here, we're going to close out the parentheses. It's important to note that removing that second $sign from the K4 value, the top value in our column, was crucial. Without that, this cell reference is locked to that cell only instead of being allowed to propagate down the selected column. Now that we've got our function in place, we need to kick into gear our formatting. So in this instance, our formatting is whatever we want the cell to look like. I would like to change the fill color of this cell to something like, let's say, a light shade of green. Now, of course, you can change anything about the cell, whether it's the fill color, border style, font style or color, or even the number formatting. This can all be changed here. Once you've made some adjustments to the cell as necessary, you can click OK. Having verified that your function asks the right question, we're going to lock it in and click OK. Now at this stage, nothing has been highlighted. So either this didn't work or our if function is working. Let's type something into M4 and see what happens. I'd like to find all employees that exceeded $700 in gross pay. By typing 700 into M4, I'll now press enter. And it doesn't look like it worked. Odd, right? Well, when it comes down to building complex functions, you need to be prepared for this. Let's go back into our Manage Rules and see what happened. By clicking on Conditional Formatting's dropdown, once again, we're going to go to Manage Rules. Inside Manage Rules, we see what it's being applied to, but in order to see the rule we built, we'll need to double-click on that cell. And there we see the problem. Our formula has quotes around it. Now, this might not always happen. However, if Excel thinks that you're typing in text, it'll try to be helpful sometimes and add quotations for you. It's important to be aware of this potential mishap because, with quotations around it, none of this is actually considered a function. In order to get Excel to do what we need to do, we're going to need to remove those quotations. Now again, this might not always happen to you, but if it does, you'll need to know where to look. So I've now removed my if functions. I'm going to click OK. And lastly, I'm going to click Apply. And there you go. Just like that, everything is now firing appropriately. Let's say I delete this cell because I'm done searching for now. All highlighting disappears. Likewise, if I search again for $500 and higher, the appropriate cells are highlighted. So, to recap, we built a new rule for K4 through K97 using the New Rule tool. Here inside the New Rule tool, we used a formula to determine which cells to format. We then used an if function to determine whether or not our search field has any value in it. If it does, then, and only then, will it ask the official question of, does a column exceed the search value? Go ahead and take this opportunity to pause the video and try this out for yourself. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back. So now we've built a search engine where we can search gross pay. But one of the problems that we've introduced now is that we're only highlighting the cell that meets the criteria. The reality is we're not looking for just this cell. We're looking for the entire record. But Excel's not highlighting the entire record. So how do we fix that? Well, it's actually a really easy fix. You see, the formula is already in place, asking the question of does gross pay exceed a certain value? All we need to do is change where that conditional formatting is impacted. To change that, we're going to click on the drop-down for conditional formatting and select Manage Rules once again. I don't see my rule, so I'll need to click on the drop-down to change from current selection to this worksheet again. This time, I'm not going to need to go into the rule because this is where I need to go. Applies to. Currently, this rule only applies to K4 through K97. However, I'd like to have it impact the entire data table. So what I'm going to do here is change that K to an A, indicating that I'd like all columns to be involved in this, from A4 to K97. So all I did was change that column value from K to A. Having made that change, I'm going to click Apply. And then I'll click OK. Check it out. Now, the entire record that matches the criteria is highlighted. I can now search for more detailed things like 700 and watch the entire row highlight. What about 800? Conditional formatting, and especially custom conditional formatting, is an incredibly powerful way of bubbling up content that otherwise can't be organized or you don't want to organize using traditional means. It is now incredibly easy to identify which of these cells meets the criteria. Go ahead and pause the video and try expanding the field of conditional formatting to encompass the entire data table. We'll see you after the break. Let's try another example of conditional formatting. First, let's clear out the gross pay search so that we're starting from a clean slate. Let's say that we'd like to identify values in the benefits column to ensure that we see all the people who have dental, retirement, or health insurance. First, we'll need to start with what cells we'd like to impact. We'll start simple. We're going to select from H4 down to H97. So we'll go ahead and select everything down here. And from here, we'll jump directly into conditional formatting once again, and we're going to create a new rule. Just like last time, we're going to start by using a formula to determine which cells to format. Now all we need to do is dictate what the rule will be. First, let's ensure that the values only highlight if that cell contains something. Just like last time, we're going to start with an if function. Our if function is going to double check to ensure that M7 does not equal 0. Because of course, if M7 does equal 0, we don't want anything to happen. Once you've injected that M7 does not equal 0, we'll need our condition. Now, our condition in the first instance was to identify all values that exceeded a given number. However, it's not so simple with text. Instead, what we'll need to do is create something that allows us to search inside the cell for a given value. You'll see many of these cells aren't just R or D. Sometimes they're combinations of these series, like D, R, and H, or RH. So we can't just search for one blanket cell and hope that it's going to match. We're going to need to tell Excel to search within the cell. To do that, we'll need to turn to the function search. Go ahead and type search with an open parentheses. Now the search function only allows for two values. The first value is what are we searching for? But the truth is we don't know yet. So we're going to tell Excel to search for whatever is currently inside cell M7. So whatever is in cell M7 is what Excel is going to be searching for. All that's left to tell Excel now is where is it going to be looking for whatever is inside that cell. I'm going to type my comma to ensure a separate value. So what column contains the letter that would go into the search box, and in that instance, it is the benefits column. So I'm going to start with the very first value at the top, just like I did last time with gross pay. I'm going to start with H4. It's important to note that just like last time as well, I want to ensure that this scales all the way down. So I'm going to need to remove the absolute value referencing of the row label, meaning that it will search the entire column of H, but it will search all the rows. Lastly, I'm going to need to close out my parentheses, and then close out the parentheses again to close out the if function. Once that's complete, we'll need to establish our formatting. This time I'll probably go with something a little bit more, pastel. Let's go purple. Having determined what you would like your cell to look like, go ahead and click OK. The only thing that's left to do once you've verified that your function is asking the appropriate question of does this cell, in this case, this entire column, contain a certain value that will be typed into M7. Let's go ahead and click OK. And at this stage, nothing is highlighted. Let's go ahead and try to type in one of these three letters. In this case, I'm going to search for all employees that have retirement benefits. And I'll hit enter to lock it in. And it doesn't seem to have done anything. So what did we do last time to ensure that everything worked the way we expected to? If you're saying we should double check to make sure that Excel didn't add quotes again, you'd be absolutely right. So let's go back into our conditional formatting dropdown, manage rules. We're going to change the formatting rules from current selection to this worksheet. And I can see it already. Here in the preview on the left, our formula does in fact have quotes again. So let's fix that. Back inside the edit field, I'm going to remove the quotations from either side of our if function. And I'm going to click OK. Lastly, we'll click Apply to lock it in. And there you go. All cells that contain the letter R are now highlighted. Likewise, if I change that R to H, all cells that contain H are now highlighted. Just like last time, if you'd like to expand the selection to encompass the entire table, that can be done. Back inside Manage Rules, we're simply going to change the Applies To. This time, however, instead of just changing the column value of the first cell reference, we're also going to need to change the value of the second column reference from H to K. Once you've made those changes, click Apply. And now all employees that meet the criteria of having health benefits are highlighted. Go ahead and pause the video and try this for yourself. We'll join you after the break. One neat little trick that'll make it easier for you to choose from these three options, D, R, or H, might be to restrict the value of this cell to just one of those three options. To restrict the value of the cell, we're going to need to validate all entries that go inside of it. Fortunately, we do have access to a tool that validates data as it's being put into the cell. To find that tool, jump into the Data tab. Here inside the Data tab, you'll see that we have access to Data Validation. Data validation is a tool that allows us to protect the cell and limit it and the values that go into it to a select approved set. Go ahead and find data validation, and ensuring that cell M7 is selected, give it a click. Here inside data validation, we have the option of restricting the value of the cell. In this case, what we'd like to do is change the value, which currently this cell allows for any value to go in, and we'd like to restrict it to a list. Of course, take note that you can also restrict these cells to protect it so that it's only whole numbers, decimal-based values, lists, dates, times, character length, and so on. For us, however, we're going to choose a list. Once we've got the list selected, it's going to ask for a source. Now, it may appear that it's asking you to choose from somewhere in the spreadsheet, but you don't have to. You can always hand type into the source field as well. In this case, we'd like to include the values of D, and in order to add the next value, we'll need to separate it with a comma. R, H, and in the event that there isn't one of those three values, or you're not ready to search just yet, we'll provide the option for not applicable yet. So again, all values should be segmented with a comma, and just in case they're not ready to search, we've got the N/A option available. Go ahead and click OK. And just like that, we have a drop-down available that allows us to search for all employees that have dental, retirement, health insurance, or if we're not searching at the moment, we can clear it out. Go ahead and pause the video and try that for yourself.